No peace in East Africa. No peace in Oromia. No justice in Oromia. There is a killing in Ethiopia.
There is killing in Ethiopia.
There will be no peace in Ethiopia. There will be no peace in Ethiopia.
Ethiopian people, I don't understand. We are here until they come out or they let us in.
A bullet in their back, hurting from leadership that treats them like their lives don't matter. President Lincoln, you would not recognize today's Republican Party. Our African American brothers and sisters are not alone. Dr. King spoke of the inescapable network of mutuality. In this moment of crisis, so many Americans are bound together in the mutual struggle for justice, dignity, and opportunity. From the Native American tribes confronting the scourge of COVID and the delay of their stimulus funding, to Latinx children being separated from their parents at the border, to Asian Americans facing hate-fueled attacks, to working families across this country struggling with poverty. We can change all of this. With the right leadership, we can heal our wounds. We can turn hardship into hope, despair into dreams. We can advance racial equality and restore the soul of our nation. But only if we do it together. Movements are built by the many, not the few. They're built by the hard and unglamorous work of grassroots organizing. They're built, in the words of the late, great Julian Bond, by the marchers whose feet have grown tired, whose voices have gone hoarse, whose shirts have stained with sweat and dirt and blood. John Lewis, as you know, left us with these marching orders. So go to iwillvote.com, iwillvote.com, check your registration status. Tell your friends, family, and neighbors to make a plan to vote. Remember, November 3rd is the last day to vote, but it's not the first day to vote. Make a plan. Get out there. Do not let your voice go unheard. Do not let your voice go uncounted. This is the most important election of our lifetime. And make no mistake, you have the power to decide the outcome. Thank you very much.
Today, we commemorate the 57th anniversary of the historic March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. I was born into an activist family with my parents, my aunts and uncles pushing me in a stroller through Bay Area streets marching for justice in the years following the March on Washington. This moment is a reminder that we must always honor the sacrifice of the leaders who made that march happen. From the names we know, like Randolph and Farmer, Young and King, to everyone who worked behind the scenes and sacrificed quietly but profoundly, far from the lights of history. I have to believe that if they were with us today, they would share in our anger and frustration as we continue to see Black men and women slain in our streets and left behind by an economy and justice system that have too often denied Black folks our dignity and rights. They would share our anger and pain, but no doubt they would turn it into fuel. They would be lacing up their shoes, locking arms, and continuing right alongside us to continue in this ongoing fight for justice. Thankfully, we don't have to wonder if we are making them proud, because a giant from that march and the civil rights era of that day, John Lewis, he lived to tell us how we're doing. In his parting essay, he wrote to all of us who hope to carry his legacy, quote, "In the last days and hours of my life, you inspired me. You filled me with hope about the next chapter of the great American story when you used your power to make a difference in our society." For Congressman Lewis, the brutal murder of Emmett Till is what shook loose the activist inside him. It was the start of a lifelong journey toward service and driving change, the same journey that countless young leaders are building upon as we speak. As John put it, Emmett Till was my George Floyd. He was my Rayshard Brooks, Sandra Bland, and Breonna Taylor. The road ahead, it is not going to be easy. But if we work together to challenge every instinct our nation has to return to the status quo and combine the wisdom of longtime warriors for justice with the creative energy of the young leaders today, we have an opportunity to make history right here and right now. So thank you so much for inviting me to celebrate with you. Let's march on in the name of our ancestors and in the name of our children and grandchildren. Thank you.
Let's hear it for Senator Kamala Harris. Our next speaker is one of the legacy original organizations that was here in 1963 in the person of Whitney Young. Please welcome the former mayor of New Orleans, the president and CEO of the National Urban League, Mark Morial.
Black Lives Matter. I want to thank Reverend Al Sharpton and the National Action Network, my friend and brother, as well as Martin Luther King III, for assembling us here on August 28th in the year 2020. In 1963, courageous men and women descended on this site, led by 6 legacy civil rights organizations, including the National Urban League. At that time, the National Urban League was led by one of the great Americans of the 20th century, Whitney M. Young, Jr. He stated from this very place at that time and on that day, on August 28, 1963, that our civil rights, our voting rights, our rights to human dignity were not negotiable. We have come back on August 28th in the year of 2020, in this 21st century, to say today that our fight for racial justice is not negotiable. We're here today to say that transforming our criminal justice system and purging it of mass incarceration and systemic racism is not negotiable. That protecting our sacred right to vote from suppressors, be they legislators, be they presidents, be they Russians, is not negotiable. That defending our right to a living wage so that every American can live in dignity is not negotiable. That dislodging structural racism that infects every institution in American life is not negotiable. That equitably funding all of our schools so all of our children can learn, and providing them with computers and broadband connectivity, and they can live and thrive with their God-given talents is not negotiable. That a fair and accurate census so that all of us are counted in accordance with the Constitution is not in 2020 negotiable. That eliminating the structural and shameful disparate impact of COVID-19 in 2020 is not negotiable. That reforming police, both police policies and police culture, and reallocating funding to summer jobs for youth, to mental health services, to homeless services, and to end the violence against our black man is not negotiable. Hands up. I can't breathe. Hands up. Don't shoot. In 1963, when they gathered on this site, brothers and sisters, just a few weeks before they gathered, that great civil rights leader, Medgar Evers, was assassinated on the front lawn of his home in Jackson, Mississippi. At that time, they were fighting a poll tax, a literacy test, I should say, that did everything possible to prevent us from voting. In 2020, we come here when the very success of 1963, the Voting Rights Act, has been gutted by the Supreme Court.
You're on our fucking stream.
We
like,
come
you don't
in
like it, get the
2020,
fuck out.
where Jacob Blake and George Floyd
interviews throughout this entire stream. Forgive us for taking a moment to talk about what our views are.
Yeah. Fucking, I swear to God. You're literally on our stream, like.
Yeah. Like, overall, the vast majority of this video has focused on what other people within the Black Lives Matter movement have to say.
100%.
Every once in a while, we're allowed to talk about the fact that we have political views,
Yep.
and that they provide a bias in the commentary that we provide.
Yep.
Like, goddamn.
And we're damned if we do, damned if we don't. If we don't say anything, the trolls are like, oh, you guys were complicit in all the things. And if you say something, they're like, oh, you guys are talking over black voices.
Exactly.
It's like, Republicans are some of the most hypocritical motherfuckers.
I mean...
Not all of them.
Honest,
not all of them.
Yeah, to be honest, it happens with Democrats and Republicans both, where they...
Well,
always
yeah.
use-
100.
They
That's
use
totally true.
totally opposite arguments against each other.
Yeah.
God, I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. Sorry, I'm walking and it's hot, so processing words is hard. But, like, Democrats and Republicans are both very guilty of using
Yes.
the same point from opposite viewpoints just for that specific, for whatever specific issue.
Show your love. You're not showing it right now. You must not have been watching the stream for very long. Like, we love everyone here, but we also will be combative when need to be.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. Some people need more tough love. Some people need tough love. Tough love.
Tell people that they're being stupid and they need to stop.
Sometimes people are just being stupid, and like it's okay to let them know. Otherwise, they just don't know. All right, I'm gonna give you this. Watch the battery.
Got it.
I'll be back in a minute.
All right, sounds good. I'm gonna sit here and talk to the stream. All right. Not sure why, Jonathan, with the start of that, of people have absolutely lost their minds. I'm not entirely sure what you mean by that, if you'd like to explain. But yeah, I definitely understand that having an alternative approach and an alternative way of talking about things is an interesting thing to view as a viewer. I mean, if you want to help us, Debbie, you can donate to our Venmo, which is posted in the links. By no means are we lumping all Republicans in as one kind of people, in the same way that we weren't lumping in Democrats as one kind of people in that statement. I would prefer if you didn't refer to being trans as a lifestyle choice. It's not about choice, it's about identity, but, you know. All right. We are going to block you, William, because you are threatening violence. Cool, cool, cool. We're done with that. Hey, just got 2 messages from folks in New York. Thanks for watching. We're closer to your side of the country now than we normally are. We're just going to get a view of the park here. It's a very pretty park. We have a pretty solid mod team, but if you're interested in helping out, you can always send us a message and we'll see about potentially adding you to our mod team. Tara? Thank you for that. I'm glad to hear that your comment about folks losing their minds wasn't an aggressive comment there, Jonathan. That's okay. That's okay. I mean, that's why we gently educate the first time around. Oh, I'm sorry about your dog. I hope they are doing well and are getting the care that they need. And I'm glad that we are able to be here and live streaming the events so that you're able to still participate even though you can't be out here physically. We should be heading back over here in a little bit, but we're just going to take a break here for about a half hour.
Police. Attacks on our right to vote. More killing. The worst economic crisis since the Great Depression that we learned about in school. And more extreme weather than ever before. But great challenges produce great leaders. We have mastered the selfie and TikToks. Now we must master ourselves. Less than a year before he was assassinated, my grandfather predicted this very moment. He said that we were moving into a new phase of the struggle. The first phase was the civil rights, and the new phase is genuine equality. Genuine equality is why we are here today and why people are coming together all across the world, from New Zealand to New Jersey. He said that we must not forget the days of Montgomery. We must not forget the sit-ins movement. We must not forget the freedom rides, the Birmingham movement, and Selma. Papa King, we won't! My generation has already taken to the streets peacefully and with masks and socially distanced to protest racism. And I want to ask the young people here to join me in pledging that we have only just begun to fight and that we will be the generation that moves from me to we. We are going to be the generation that dismantles systemic racism once and for all, now and forever. We are going to be the generation that calls a halt to police brutality and gun violence once and for all, now and forever. We are going to be the generation that reserves climate change and saves our planet once and for all, now and forever. And we are going to be the generation that ends poverty here in America, the wealthiest nation on earth, once and for all, now and forever. We are the great dreams of our grandparents, great-grandparents, and all our ancestors. We stand and march for love, and we will fulfill my grandfather's dream. So, show me what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like. Show me what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like.
Show me what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like.
One last time. Show me what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like.
Okay, then let's show them.
A proud dad. Let me thank God that we've been able to assemble today, and to thank Reverend Sharpton and the National Action Network and all of the conveners that actually are here today, and most of all, these families that have been impacted by police brutality and misconduct. So we've come to bear witness, to remain awake, to remember from where we've come and to carefully consider where we're going. Whether you're here in person, online, or watching on MSNBC and other networks, thank you for joining us for this March on Washington. Together, we are taking a stand, and we're taking a giant step forward. Let me also thank Al Green for the very, very warm introduction, my dear friend. But we're taking a step forward on America's rocky but righteous journey towards justice. August 28th is a day to remember the triumphs and tragedies that have taken place in our historic struggle for racial justice. Today, we commemorate the March on Washington to Jobs and Freedom in 1963, where my father declared his dream. But we must never forget the American nightmare of racist violence exemplified when Emmett Till was murdered on this day in 1955, and the criminal justice system failed to convict his killers. 65 years later, we still struggle for justice, demilitarizing the police, dismantling mass incarceration, and declaring and determinedly as we can that Black lives matter. In our struggle for justice, there are no permanent victories. For on this day, 12 years ago, I was honored to address the Democratic National Convention in Denver. And on that night, on that evening in the Mile High City, our spirits were soaring as the Democrats nominated Barack Obama, who would go on to become the first African-American president of these United States. But the progress we celebrated then is imperiled yet again. And now we must march to the ballot box and the mailboxes to defend the freedoms that earlier generations worked so hard to win. In so many ways, we stand together today in the symbolic shadow of history. But we are making history together right now. We're marching with the largest and most active multi-generational, multiracial movement for civil rights since the 1960s. From high school students to senior citizens, Black as well as white, Latino, Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islanders, Americans are marching together, many for the first time, and we're demanding real, lasting, structural change. We are marching together for time-honored goals and in timely ways. We are courageous, but conscious of our health. We are socially distant, but spiritually united. We are masking our faces, but not our faith in freedom. And we are taking our struggle to the streets and to social media. The nation has never seen such a mighty movement, a modern-day incarnation of what my father called the coalition of conscience. And if we move forward with purpose and passion, we will complete the work so boldly began in the 1960s. We're marching to overcome what my father called were the triple evils of poverty, racism, and violence. And today, those evils have exacerbated 4 major challenges that currently face our country. First, COVID-19 tragically has killed more than 175,000 Americans, disproportionately African American, Latino, and low-income people in every background. Second, more than 30 million Americans are unemployed again, disproportionately people of color. COVID-19 has laid bare the structural and racial inequalities in our economy that kept too many people trapped in the debt and poverty. Third, police brutality and gun violence are killing so many unarmed African Americans. Today, we march with their families and we say their names. George Floyd, Boham Jean, Breonna Taylor, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Yusef Richardson, Terrence Crutcher, Trayvon Martin, Ahmaud Arbery, Elijah McClain, and so many others. And fourth, our voting rights are under attack. We must vigorously defend our right to vote because those rights were paid for with the blood of those lynched for seeking to exercise their constitutional rights. They were paid for with the blood of civil rights workers such as Sammy Young Jr., Goodman, Swerney, and Cheney, Jimmy Lee Jackson, Viola Liuzzo, James Reed. Those rights were paid for through the sacrifices made by heroes such as C.T. Vivian, Fannie Lou Hamer, Hosea Williams, and John Lewis. But since the United States Senate has failed to renew the Voting Rights Act, we have had to overcome a whole new trick bags of tactics to suppress our votes. Discriminatory voter ID requirements, cutbacks in early voting and vote by mail, voter purges targeting those who have missed several elections, and disenfranchising those who have served their time and paid their debt to the society. And now COVID-19 is making it dangerous, even deadly, to stand in line at polling places. We shouldn't have to risk our lives to cast our votes. We need to be able to do what President Trump does, vote safely by mail. But now we are struggling to overcome the dismantling of the U.S. Postal Service for the express purpose of suppressing our vote. With all these threats to our lives and liberties, our challenge is to use this moment to expand this movement, a movement that not only raises its voice, but casts its votes, pursues its vision, and makes lasting change. The scripture says, where there is no vision, the people perish. Our vision is best expressed by a phrase we must never forget. That is the beloved community. With those words, my father, John Lewis, Ella Baker, Rosa Parks, and so many other historic women and men envision an America whose dramatic practice is as good as its promise. An America where the triple evils of poverty, racism, and violence will be replaced by peace, justice, and shared abundance, and where hate and fear finally give way to help and love. To achieve that America, we need to raise our voices and cast our votes. Over the weeks ahead, culminating on Election Day, we need to vote as if our lives and our livelihoods, our liberties depend on it, because they do. No person, no people are more keenly aware of the risk of disenfranchisement than those who've suffered from it. There's a knee upon the neck of democracy, and our nation can only live so long without the oxygen of freedom. The strength must be exercised by more than rhetoric and more than marching. The simple challenge before us is that everyone can cast a ballot, and everyone who can must cast a ballot. And that ballot that is cast must be counted, and the result must be transparent and known to the whole world. And so today, I can call on everyone with the means to drive people to the polls, to make a plan for yourself, for your family and your neighbor, for those organizations and companies that care about democracy. I call on you today to offer your resources and your capacity to make sure every ballot is counted. If our forefathers were willing to die for the right to vote, we can work for the right to vote, and I will continue to call on you to act in the coming days. You know, my father was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee, while standing in solidarity with poor working people, sanitation workers, whose slogans, I am a man, was a statement that they were human beings with rights that should be respected and acknowledged. They were asking for safe working conditions, for a living wage, for recognition of their union, and for human dignity. They summed up their struggle with those 4 words, I am a man. That simple but powerful slogan impairs movements today, from Black Lives Matter to Fight for 15 and to the Me Too struggle against sexual harassment and abuse. Movements of marginalized Americans are still trying to claim the dignity they've been denied. Martin Luther King Jr. fought for the dignity of work, and that fight is never ending. In 1963, the March on Washington demanded jobs and freedoms. In 1968, the Memphis sanitation strike workers that demanded, and the Poor People's Campaign insisted that working people should not live and labor in poverty. Those fights foreshadowed our struggle today to make the minimum wage a living wage, not a poverty wage. And we are fighting alongside the frontline workers, sanitation workers, healthcare workers, grocery workers, transport workers, food service workers, and so many more. They are praised for being essential, but they are treated as if they're expendable. While standing with sanitation workers in Memphis, Dad said, so often we overlook the work and the significance of those who are not in professional jobs, of those who are not in the so-called big jobs. But let me say to you tonight that wherever you are or whenever you are engaged in work that serves humanity and is for the building of humanity, it has dignity and worth. Now we have a president who confesses greatness with grandiosity. But my father knew better. Everyone, he said, can be great because everyone can serve. He understood the human yearning for recognition. And in his famous speech, he explained that everyone wants to be a drum major, the leader of the marching band. And he challenged us to channel our drum major instinct into becoming drum majors for justice. While we honor our history, we must be a living movement, not a monument. If Dad were here today, I'm sure he would implore us not to deify him or selectively quote him when convenient. He would want us to be drama majors for justice, to champion the ideals he promoted, racial justice, social equality, and peace. And he would gently but intently challenge us not to dwell upon the past, but to live and labor in what he called the fierce urgency of now. So if you're looking for a savior, get up and find a mirror. We must become the heroes of the history we are making. And us means all of us. In 1963, after my father spoke, Bayard Rustin, the architect of the march, asked the participants to join in demanding that Congress pass strong civil rights and voting rights laws. More than half a century later, we must demand that the United States Senate stop blocking passage of the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Restoration Act. And so when we conclude today, let's remember that this is the commitment march in the spirit of 1963. I ask you to join me in pledging to act in three ways. First, because our civil and human rights are at stake in this election, I ask you not only to register and vote, but make sure that at least one other person registers and votes. Second, I ask you to commit to service and struggle in your community, from voter registration to raising the minimum wage, to demilitarizing the police. Get involved with one or more of many worthwhile struggles in your community. And third, I ask you to pledge, as my father and John Lewis did, to get into good trouble and do it nonviolently. Remember that in the fight against injustice, nonviolence doesn't mean passive acceptance. It means peaceful resistance. We must come together and join with the Black Lives Movement,